Good morning, everybody. This is Noreen Jolloway-Gill with the University of North Texas Workplace Inclusion and Sustainable Employment, UNT-WISE. And you're here because of the Social Security Work Incentive workshop that we will be having, the second of two parts of the workshop that we will be having today with our speakers, Sandy Hardy-Smith and Stacey Levrets. So we have a couple of things to go through before the workshop begins, and I wanted to be sure and cover those and make sure that people who are currently on the call, if you have any questions or comments as the presentation continues, that you use the question box that you can find in your control panel. And that's the way that you can write to me, and as the presentation unfolds, then I'll be sure and send that information on to Sandy and Stacey as they go through their PowerPoint presentation, the explanations that they have to share with you today. Also, during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can, and you're not using the computer, you can also send them to untwise@unt.edu. And that way we'll pick up those emails and share those questions with Stacey and Sandy as well. Now, as you know, the UNT-WISE will be offering CRC credit and CU credits for this session. You must have registered to receive that credit. And so if you are listening with another person in their office and sharing a computer, or if you're listening by telephone, then you want to be sure and email us while we're still online. Use that untwise@unt.edu to send us an email. That way we know you're listening, and that we'll be sure and be able to offer you the credit for this session. In addition to that, I'm thinking that if you do have audio trouble during the session, just send me a text, a question, a comment in the question box, and I can send you the phone number that you can use to get back into at least the audio version of the webinar session. The other thing that has been helpful for people is that they just totally go out and come back in if you lose contact with us. So we have a lot of information to share with you today. As I mentioned, we have two great speakers with us. Sandy Hardy-Smith, who you heard from last week, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Imagine Enterprises and oversees the Work Incentive Planning and Assistance Project for West Texas. Stacey Levrets is a Community Work Incentive Coordinator, and as well as the team leader for Imagine Enterprises, working intensely and directly with a lot of community partners and individuals who are seeking support through benefits planning. So let's do a voice check first and say hello, Sandy and Stacey, and let's make sure everybody can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Sandy.
Good morning. This is Stacey.
So if you can hear Sandy and Stacey just fine, send me a text, let me, or a comment in the question box, and that way I'll know everything is sounding okay. We have one comment from Kathy that voices are bouncing around, so you guys be sure that your microphone is close to your mouth. Good audio from a couple of other people, and I hear. And let's see if, yeah, we're getting good reports now. I can hear. Good audio, no problem. Super. So we're ready to go, Sandy and Stacey. Thank you both for being with us today, and we're looking forward to it.
Sure. And hi, this is Sandy, and I'm going to start us off today. And I'm thrilled Stacey's here. She's been my sidekick for a long time, so I think we make a pretty doggone good team. I did receive some private questions last week from the training last week, and I was just thrilled and happy that people were asking questions. So I hope we have good questions today. Before I start on Title 16, I do want to point out that UNT should have sent you a couple of things. You should have a Title II calculation sheet. Remember, that's the sheet last week that we used to track the SGA. So you should have a blank form of that. You should have a blank SSI template that we're going to go through today, and you'll be learning about how to use that. You should also have 2 links to get the past amounts and what the trial work periods and the SGA were for previous years, so you should have that. And then Noreen, I'm not sure if you sent it out yet or not, but we sent you a link on how to look at the QMB and the SLMB, some of those Medicare assistance programs to pay for some of those premiums and copays. So those are things that you should have. So with that said, last week we spent the whole time talking about this really large Title II umbrella and all of the programs that fall within it. Now I might reference Title II, but for the most part we are done talking about Title II. So it's kind of like compartmentalize that information and stow it away, because the information I'm going to share today is brand new and it's a whole different program. It's affectionately known at Social Security as Title 16. Title 16 is not an umbrella. Title 16 is Title 16. We know it fondly as SSI, or Supplemental Security, or Supplemental Security Income. My goodness, I didn't even get that right. So today we're going to spend our time talking about SSI. And William, I see you had a question or a comment about Social Security referring people or encouraging people not to earn over $740 because they will lose their check. I wanted to address that actually before I got started. Yes, that is true. And it's not because Social Security doesn't know their job. It's just that many people with disabilities, they don't go to work, so they don't get to practice this part of what they know often enough. So they will pull it up and find out what the number is, and they kind of give them a number. But you guys, I think there's 100 of you on this call, you now know that that is not the answer, that it is gross minus all those lovely work incentives to come up with the countable, right? So William, you just go forth and train, and I will look for your name on the Social Security's website as the Advocate of the Year, that you're going to get that message out. And you know, oftentimes, and I think Stacey can agree with this, we need to go in and gently train Social Security too on how things work. And they will pull it up to try to prove us wrong, and they just smile and go on with what they need to be doing correctly. So yes, there's a lot of myths out there, and that's why we're always excited to do this training to help dispel those myths. So with no further ado, we're going to enter the world of SSI. Last week I talked to you about how Title II was an entitlement program. Somebody paid in and became that insured worker. Well, that's not the case with SSI. With SSI, it really is general tax revenue. It's our taxes at work. And so it's a needs-based program. You have to show need. You have to have limited income and resources. And it's just really given to you to pay for your food and shelter. It's not meant for anybody to live an extravagant life because it is needs-based. I'm only going to reference resources now, so if you have questions on resources, you can ask those at the question time. But when I say resources, if you're an individual who is qualified for SSI, they talk about a resource limit of $2,000, and if you're an eligible couple, meaning you both receive SSI, the resource limit is $3,000. Now, it's not all-inclusive. It doesn't include things like the house you live in and the property that is on the deed. It doesn't talk about one car of any value. It doesn't talk about your wedding ring. I mean, there are burial plots, life insurance that are term. So there are exceptions to the resources on how they come to the $2,000, but please know that this is a needs-based program. And in the nation, the most a person can receive for an SSI check, and we're going to talk about what some of the requirements are, but the highest SSI check that's given out in 2014 is $721. If you're an eligible couple, that amount is $1,082. Now, for those of you who are math majors, you will see that SSI is not really a marriage incentive program, because if they were single, they would be getting over $1,400. But I guess Social Security believes that two can live cheaper than one. Everybody at Social Security must be single. But those are the amounts. Now, I understand that we have some people besides the state of Texas who are on the call. It is possible that your state has a state supplement. For instance, California has a state supplement. And that supplement kind of replaces their eligibility for food stamps. So they're not getting a higher SSI check. They're getting an SSI check plus a state supplement. So if you are in one of those states and you're like, yeah, Sandy, you're wrong, you know, we get 900, the national limit is 721. You just happen to have a state supplement. So I hope that alleviated any confusion. But it is needs-based, and as you see in parentheses on the first bullet, children can get it. You can get SSI, you know, when you're an infant. So it's not necessarily limited to somebody working or a certain age requirement. You will see some of the requirements are aged, blind, and disabled. And again, blind doesn't stand out as a different disability. We talked about this last week. It's just that when these laws and programs were written, the advocates for the community of blind just advocated strongly, and they really won a lot of amazing things. Are there any questions so far, Noreen?
No, I think we're doing fine.
Okay, all right. So deeming and ISM, Noreen and I were talking prior to the call about all the acronyms that Social Security uses, and so I really try in training not to use acronyms once I explain them to you. But the next few slides are so important, and people tend, when they are trained by someone such as myself and Stacy, to kind of forget about this part. And you cannot forget about what I'm going to explain to you. This has nothing to do with people going to work, but this has everything to do with where and how people live. Remember, this is a needs-based program, so you have to be able to demonstrate need. So we're going to spend a couple of slides talking about how Social Security looks at where you're living when you receive SSI. Even if you never go to work, you could lose the benefit. So you guys have to remember to keep this in the forefront of your mind and not just keep what happens when I go to work. Because with SSI, where and how they live is equally important, and I'm hopefully going to dispel some more myths too, so when someone comes in and says Social Security's picking on me, we'll know that's not true. Social Security doesn't have the time to pick on anybody, contrary to public opinion. The first thing I want to talk to you about is deeming. There are three types of deeming. There is spouse-to-spouse deeming, there's parent-to-child deeming, and then there's sponsor-to-alien. We're going to spend the majority of our time talking about parent-to-child. I'm not going to address sponsor-to-alien just for time restraint, so if you have questions on that, you can let me know, and I'll happily send you some links or some information. But spouse-to-spouse deeming just simply means my name is Sandy Smith, and I am married, and I receive SSI, and my husband does not. Social Security says part of his income should be available to me, should be deemed to me. So Social Security has a formula that they use to determine how much should be deemed to me, even if my husband doesn't give me a dime. Social Security says this is the formula that we use on everyone. So it is possible if my husband earned a large amount of money, regardless of how severe my disability is, I might not be eligible for SSI because I don't demonstrate need. My husband earns enough. In the same respect, it's parent-to-child deeming. I'm Sandy Smith. I have a disability. My parents do not. My parents do not receive SSI. If they did, then we would just be a family of SSI recipients, and there would be no deeming. Somebody who's ineligible for SSI has to have income and resources. So in the scenario we're going to share today under parent-to-child deeming, I am a child who receives SSI. When I say child, I mean under the age of 18. and I have a parent or parents who work, who have resources, they have earnings, they might have veterans benefits. I mean, they have cash coming in and they have resources available to them. Social Security says we're going to do the worksheet and we're going to see how much of your parent or parents' income should be available to you. They take into consideration how many siblings you have, of those siblings who has a disability. They even look at child support. If an eligible child receives child support from a parent, Social Security will count 2/3 of it as unearned income. So there's lots of factors. You will never see me agree to do a training on deeming calculations because we don't do deeming calculations. We teach people to recognize when there's a deeming situation and get them to Social Security. Now, William, you'll be thrilled to hear that Social Security does deeming really, really well. They tend to be on top of deeming situations. They have a computer program where they can plug in the numbers of household makeup, the different incomes, the different resources, the different jobs that are out there, and they can come up with this in a relatively short period of time. But the things I want you to remember as you're working with beneficiaries is if there's a spouse-to-spouse, meaning the beneficiary you're working with receives a benefit, but the husband doesn't, there's probably a spouse-to-spouse deeming situation. If you're working with children under the age of 18 whose parents work, have resources, have other forms of income coming in, they probably have already went through a parent-to-child deeming, but you definitely want to keep this on their radar. Now, I want to stress, because this gets missed in every training that I do, you're going to blend what I just said with what I'm about to say, and don't do that. Parent-to-child deeming stops at age 18. There is no more deeming. There's deeming the night before their birthday, they wake up and deeming stops. So what happens when you have a child on SSI who wakes up and is 18 and has been in a deeming situation? Okay, well, here's a good myth to dispel. If my neighbor has a child who has a very mild disability but is receiving SSI, but my child has a significant disability and we're not, it's probably because of parent-to-child deeming. My husband and I have too much resources, too much income. Our child is not eligible for SSI. But when my child wakes up on age 18, that's a perfect time to apply, because our family's income and resources no longer is a factor, because Social Security says my child is now an adult. So oftentimes when family members are declined, found ineligible for SSI, this is a wonderful time to apply when the child turns 18, because parent income and resources, it doesn't matter. So, but what does matter for anybody receiving SSI, who's over the age of 18 or who's 18 or older, Social Security looks at what we call in-kind support and maintenance. The acronym is ISM, and it simply says that somebody in the household is helping them with their food and shelter. Because remember, that's what SSI is for. It pays food and shelter. Now, the scary thing, and the part that Stacey and I talk to all family members about, is when they have a child living at home or even living in their own apartment, don't pay for their food and shelter. Because if you pay for their food and shelter, Social Security says, well, this is a needs-based program. If you have somebody paying for your food and or shelter, you are not entitled to your full check. And oftentimes, we meet family members who just cannot bring themselves to charge their son or daughter rent and food. And when I say food, I mean edible food. I don't mean laundry soap and shampoo. I mean consumable foods. But what Social Security says is if that is the case, If indeed you are not charging your child anything for food and shelter, rather than finding them to be ineligible for SSI completely, they do what's called the value of the 1/3 reduction, VTR. What that simply says is instead of receiving their $721 check, because they have someone helping with food and shelter, they're going to reduce that check by 1/3. So as long as they're paying nothing towards what Social Security refers to as their fair share, Social Security, the most they will pay them is $480.67 in 2014. So there's a 1/3 reduction. And the message to parents really should be, little Johnny needs to learn to pay rent and pay for his food. He needs to learn to pay his fair share. And if he's not doing it, what's going to happen when you're not around? Plus, if he pays his fair share, if he writes you a check for his fair share, then he's eligible for the $721. So I've used the fancy term fair share quite a bit. So what does that mean in English? Well, it's twofold. Fair share simply means who lives at your address. They don't have to be family. They don't have to be biological. It's who lives there. They don't have to be of a certain age. So how many people live in the house? Okay? All right, and then we figure out what is our rent or mortgage, what is our gas, water, electric, not cable, not newspaper, not credit card bills, but your basic utilities, and how much edible food do you buy in a month. You add up those figures, and you divide it by the number of people living in your household, and that's your fair share. Now, let's say that you have parents who earn a very large wage. Let's say they're attorneys or doctors, and they live in a very expensive house. And when you do that math, you just cannot reach your fair share. There's also a term called fair market value, and that just means if mom or dad put up my room and use of the kitchen and bathroom and laundry facilities in the newspaper to a college student or just to rent it out, what is the fair market value in my area? And does that help this person reach their fair share? Now, I can't tell you what fair market value is. I live in a little town in Texas called Stephenville, and I bet our mortgages and rents are a lot less than those who would live in San Francisco or staying in Texas, in Houston or Austin. The cost of living is just different. So you and Social Security would need to agree on what the fair market value is. But that is one way of getting back to the $721 check. And if you convince a parent to charge their child rent once you figure out the fair market value or their fair share, the child writes them a check, they get a receipt, they turn it into Social Security, they show intent to pay, and hopefully it should be that easy to get the check turned in. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple of comments. And one is that you are using the words eligibility and entitlement, and the idea or the thought was that Social Security is an entitlement. What is the difference?
I am so sorry. Okay, let me clarify. When I'm talking Title II, I'm talking entitlement. Somebody paid in FICA taxes and they are entitled to that benefit. Under SSI, there isn't an entitlement program because nobody is paying into this but our tax dollars. It's like a welfare program. It's needs-based. So you have to meet a lot of eligibility criteria to become eligible for SSI and to retain SSI. So I'm talking to you right now about how Social Security determines your, number one, eligibility for SSI based on people who can help you with food and shelter, and continuing to receive SSI because you're still using that money for food and shelter. again, at that fair market rate or at your fair share rate. Does that help? I hope that helps. Because nothing with SSI is an entitlement. Okay? Noreen? Noreen? Hello? Stacy, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so Noreen must have just lost contact. So when Noreen gets back on, she can answer the next questions. I'm sorry, I just unplugged my thing that I plugged in. So I hope that helps, because there is really no entitlement for SSI, and that's why I have to talk to you about so many other things before we even get to the work. Okay? Now, there's this thing called a 12-month suspension. And this is equally important. What the 12-month suspension says is I go to Vegas and I win big. Well, the first month it's considered income, and the second month and thereafter it's considered a resource. And if I win big, I'm over resources. Or more likely, Grandma or Aunt Evie is going to die and leave my child with disability, or me, a check for $100,000 in her will so that I'm taken care of. That's always a lovely thought, but it makes them ineligible for SSI right away because they're over-resourced. Another option is if you are into a Medicaid type facility, if you're hospitalized for more than 30 days, or if you're incarcerated for more than 30 days, what happens is the month that it happens, you start a 12-month calendar period of suspension. You're not terminated, you're just not having to pay for food and shelter for whatever reason, or you demonstrate that you have enough money or resources to cover yourself. And the 12-month suspension period says if you can pay down your winnings, your inheritance, if you get out of jail, if you do those things within a 12-month period, then your SSI benefits start again. If it doesn't happen within a 12-month period, then you will be terminated. So please know, I don't know what my computer's doing, please know that when you are over resources, given an inheritance, given an extra house, remember one of the resource requirements is one house. So there's many things that can make you ineligible for any reason other than work. If it's for work, this 12-month suspension period doesn't matter. It has to be for over income, over resources, in a facility to where your food and shelter is taken care of. You have 12 calendar months to get it under and back under resources, or to no longer be incarcerated, and then it continues. That 13th month, though, you will be terminated. So you would have to go through the reapplication process again. Noreen, are you back?
Sandy, I am back, and we did have a couple more questions. Well,
okay.
We're under some small craft mornings down here in the Houston area, so Houston, California. But, so it was something that shut me out for a little bit, so I apologize. And we did have a couple more questions, though, that I'm not sure if you had already answered.
I have.
These.
I just answered the first one, I think.
Does parents need to claim this income that the child pays for taxes?
I don't know that answer. Stacy, do you know that answer? I don't think so, but I don't know that answer.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't think so, but those are, to me, it's a guess. Stacy, are you kind of using common sense there, or do you know?
I believe that the child just has to file their own tax return separately, right? Even though they can be claimed as a dependent for their parents?
Yes, I believe that's true, but yeah. If you would send that question, or Noreen, keep that question, and we can get some information to Noreen to send out to the group. That's one that you
Patricia, will be sure
jump.
And get that to you. Okay, and then the other questions from Brenda is, deeming of spouse or parent's income is excluded if the ineligible person, spouse or parent, receive income based on need.
Yes.
That
yes.
sounds more like a comment.
Yes, that is a comment, and that is a correct comment. The major,
person.
Yeah. Just like if the parent is also on SSI, there isn't deeming. It's just you have a household of people on SSI. Okay, any other questions?
That's all we have for now.
Okay, so the other thing that you need to know about SSI that you absolutely cannot forget is, remember I said you can have children who receive SSI, you know, even at birth. So they're receiving SSI based on a whole different definition of Social Security. Theirs is more about how their disability impacts their functions of daily living. It's not about can they go to work. They're not going to see if a six-month-old can go to work. So it's very, very important that when a child under the age of 18 turns 18, they're going to start getting notified by Social Security that they need to complete an age 18 redetermination. What that means is they have to reapply for SSI based on the adult definition. And they have to be determined eligible to continue to receive SSI as an adult. I'm about to break another myth. You will often hear parents say, well, my child was receiving SSI and then all of a sudden it was just stopped. Well, how old was your child? 18, 19. Did they go through the redetermination? What's that? Because Social Security has no recourse but to terminate them because they're receiving SSI based on the child's definition. The person must reapply under the adult definition. There is no way around it. They have to be determined eligible based on this new definition, and if it doesn't happen, they will be terminated. So it's so important. Social Security will contact you, usually by a letter, letting you know that this age 18 redetermination process needs to happen. But you know, Social Security sends such clear, short, distinct, friendly letters that oftentimes that gets missed because it usually starts, dear beneficiary, you may be no longer eligible for benefits, and your brain tends to stop after that sentence. But you do need to let your folks know who are 17 or getting close to 18 that they need to reapply. You can't forget this because they're automatically terminated if they do not complete this process. I cannot stress how much you cannot forget about age 18 redetermination. It is critical. And I think, and Stace, feel free to interrupt me, but if I think they send you 2 letters and then after the second letter, if they don't hear from you, you're terminated.
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, they're not going to spend their day hunting you down to make sure that you get found eligible as an adult. So, anyhow, are there any questions on anything I've talked about so far today? Because those are all about how old you are, where you're living, how you're living, who can potentially help you with this food and shelter. I haven't even talked about going to work yet. So, any questions on that, Noreen?
There was a request to review the 12-month suspension period also.
Sure. The 12-month suspension period, again, has nothing to do with work. It just says, remember, SSI is a needs-based program. So you have to have limited income and stay below the resource limit. And an event occurs that either puts you in a facility where your food and shelter are taken care of. Incarcerated is one that comes to mind, or you get extra resources. You win the lotto, you go to Vegas, a family member leaves you. Income, like I said, $100,000 is definitely over resources. If you're an individual, you can only have $2,000. Or maybe mom and dad leave you the house and suddenly you have 2 houses. So now you're over resources because you have 2 homes, not 1. So there's many factors that can put you into a situation to where you're over resources, or you find yourself in a facility to where you no longer are paying food and shelter. So if you're incarcerated, you need to be set free within 12 calendar months from the date of incarceration, or you will be terminated. If you receive excess resources from some of the areas that I discussed, including the house, you have to get below resource limit again within a 12 calendar within 12 calendar months, or again, you're terminated. And if you're terminated after a 12-month suspension, you can reapply, but you have to, again, still meet the requirements of being under resources and still paying for your food and shelter with a need. Again, you have to, it's needs-based. So I hope that clarifies.
Okay. And we did have a request to discuss how the money is affected if you are eligible for both SSI and SSDI. And
we're getting to that. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to briefly touch on that. You're going to see it on some of our worksheets.
Okay. And then the last request was
what did I do?
A question about Social Security and how long does it take, does SSI take to go into effect at the age of 18 after they reapply?
Okay.
Isn't it back to the date of application?
Yeah, I mean, because you can go backwards to I think it's 12 months, but it's your date of application. It's not, that's not the term. Stacy, do you remember the term, the date of when you call the 800 number? Not date of intent. I can't remember the word.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that word, Noreen, so if you want to keep that, we can get that information to you also.
Okay, we'll do that. All right, Victoria, I'll send you a note, okay?
Sorry, Victoria. Anything else?
No, that's it for now.
Okay, so 1619A, remember last week I said Social Security, it's all or nothing. That's why this countable income was so important last week. Well, once you're found eligible for SSI, Social Security never looks at this SGA again. Instead, they look at this thing, this law called 1619A, the silliest term ever. But 1619A just simply says on the calculation sheets that we're going to go over today, when you use all applicable work incentives and you still zero out on how much SSI you're due that month, Social Security says that is when you hit your break-even point. That simply means you're no longer eligible for an SSI check. So we're not going to talk about SGA today. We're going to talk about when, at what point do we use this calculation sheet and we are no longer eligible for SSI. That's all 1619A says. Just like last week, I kind of gave you a preview of what we're going to do in the next 45 minutes. It looks like a lot, but it's really, really not, because some of this stuff you heard last week. See, if you look at the last two bullets, you see IRWI in Section 301. You guys are already experts on that, right? So we're going to touch on it and remind you, but we're not going to go into some deep training. So here is the calculation sheet, and I'm going to go over 3 of them. Oh, Stacy, I'm sorry. Did you want to talk about retrospective monthly accounting?
Yes. It's just when someone goes to work, there's a 2-month delay in their check being reduced because Social Security uses something called retrospective accounting. So we need to let people know ahead of time. If you go to work and you report that this month, it's going to be 2 months before your check is actually adjusted. So I help people prepare by that, by letting them know how much their check is actually supposed to be, and I encourage them to set aside the difference so that when Social Security comes back and says we made a mistake and we overpaid you, they have that money and they can repay. Also, if they stop working and their check is supposed to go back up, it's going to be 2 months before it goes back up. So we need to prepare people for that.
Yeah, and that's really, really scary, because if somebody stops working, they're not only no longer getting their earnings, they're not getting their SSI check for 2 months either. So that preparedness for the retrospective monthly accounting is really, really critical. So, and Stacy, I apologize.
Yeah, Stacy and Sandy, I get a couple. I'm having a couple of notes. So people are kind of, your microphone's a little bit in and out. So just be sure your sound is in a good spot. And anybody that's having trouble hearing, make sure your speakers are on. And so I'm sure you all are. So Stacy, just in terms of that retrospective monthly accounting, just making sure a comment that it's a 60-day period or a 90-day period.
It's 2 months. They generally run 2 months behind. So, you know, if the check's always issued on the 1st when you have SSI. So if you reported that today, it would be 2 months before they made the adjustment.
All right. I think that answers that question. Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's look at the first calculation sheet. So this is a person, when we look at unearned income, Title II, everything we talked about last week for Title II falls under unearned income. Some other examples of unearned income might be workers' comp, might be veterans benefits, but it's unearned income. So let's say for this scenario, the person receives SSDI of $225. Well, that is not very much money, and they're not working, so they should be eligible for an SSI check. So there's a 4-step process on this calculation sheet, and let's look at it. The first one addresses the unearned income. So you'll see that they have unearned income of $225. What Social Security says is we're going to ignore the first $20, don't spend it all in one place, and so of the $225, we're going to count $205. There is no gross earned income. In other words, this person is not working, so we don't even need to do step 3 or step 2. We don't even really need to do step 3 because on step 3 we kind of add the totals of step 1 and 2. But we go to step 4, and again, what is the highest your SSI check should be, and that's $721 if they're paying their fair share. Remember, it might be the 1/3 reduction. But in this case, the person is paying their fair share, so they should be eligible for a check of $721, but because SSI is needs-based, they have other income. They have the unearned income on step 1. So they subtract the $205 from step 1, and this person is eligible for a check of $516 in SSI. The one thing I haven't said yet is with SSI comes Medicaid, and in the state of Texas, you get Medicaid once you're found eligible for SSI without a waiting period, so that's really a bonus. I'm going to go through 2 more calculation sheets and then we'll stop and see if there's any questions. So many of you, and William, I'm going to keep picking on you because you had your wonderful comment at the beginning. Oftentimes you might go to Social Security and they'll say don't earn more than $85 or your SSI check will be reduced. Well, how scary is that to somebody who has a needs-based income already? I mean, so let me show you where that statement usually comes from. In this scenario, there is no unearned income, so there's no Title II, there's no veterans, there's nothing else. This person is just eligible for SSI and gets a job. And they usually will panic when they get their first couple of jobs because they're learning the dance of SSI. So this person comes in, and I'll pick on Stacy, sits with Stacy and says, I have gross monthly earnings of $350. And Stacy will say, okay, well, Social Security ignores the first 20. Because we didn't use it above, we get to use it here. If we used it above, we may not use it here. So Social Security ignores the first 20, and then they ignore the first 65. Ooh, look at that, 20 plus 65 is $85. Ding, 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 ding. That's what Social Security is thinking about. So Social Security, in effect, ignores the first 20, ignores the next 65, and then whatever that balance is, and in this case it's $265, they deduct your SSI check $1 for every 2 you earn. Okay, so of the $350, Social Security is only going to count $132.50 when determining how much your revised SSI check should be. Again, with this calculation, there's really no need to do step 3 because we don't have anything in step 1 to add to it. So in step 4, we do the same dance. We take the $721 because this person's paying their fair share. We subtract the countable unearned income, and so this person has $588.50. And I think Stacy and I could look at you guys with a straight face to say the person will still panic because they're no longer receiving $721. They're starting to see the end of their Medicaid coming because their check is starting to be reduced. So many people, even still receiving a check of $588, will still consider quitting. So we have added what we call step 5. Step 5 is kind of their usable income. But let's look at this, Sandy, on how much money you really have, because you still have the $350 of gross earnings. You still have your revised SSI check. So instead of receiving your normal $721 of SSI, you're now receiving combined income of $938.50. Again, we're talking gross wages in the calculation, so there is a percentage, 15% minus 15%, because there is taxes coming out. But for usable income, it always benefits the person to go to work. So we have found doing this step 5 really helps keep the person motivated to go to work. Noreen asked a question, and I delayed saying we would get to it. Well, this is the first time we're going to get to it, and that's with somebody who receives a Title II check and an SSI check and goes to work. What does that look like? So let's look at this calculation. With this calculation, this person, again, receives $225, and for the sake of this training, we're going to say that it's SSDI. Okay? Again, Social Security ignores the first 20 and only counts $205. This person goes to work and has monthly gross income of $463. But look, we cannot use the $20 because we already used it above. That's why they call it a general income exclusion, because it's a floater. You must use it in step 1. If you use it in step 1 in its entirety, you cannot use it again in step 2. So we don't have the 20 to exclude from our gross earned income. But we do still get to use the $65 earned income exclusion. The earned income exclusion is not a floater. It always stays with your earned income, so I think it's named pretty good. So of the $463 in gross monthly wages, Social Security subtracts $65, so they have $398. And just like we did in our previous calculation, Social Security divides that amount by 2 and only counts $199 of the $463 that they grossed that month. Now, because we have 2 sources of cash benefits, we do use step 3. With step 3, we take our countable unearned income of $205. We take our countable earned income of $199 and we add them together. And there's $404. Ignore the past. We're going to get to that shortly. So this person, with the 2 checks, Social Security is only going to count $404. So it's the same dance we've been doing, $721 minus the $404. This person is still receiving an SSI check of $317 and still has Medicaid. So we do step 5 to kind of show them what their usable income looks like. So we take the $225 check that they get from SSDI. We take the $463 gross check from their earnings. We take the $317 revised SSI check amount. And again, before the net of their earned income, they have usable income of over $1,000. So that is just a really a motivating circumstance to keep people motivated. And Stacy kind of wants to share how she sits down with the beneficiary and goes over this form. And then Noreen, when Stacy's done, we'll see if there's any questions. Sure.
Yes, each time I sit down with a person who's on SSI, I always go over this calculation sheet with them, and I also go over it with parents, because parents, they hear their child's SSI is going to be reduced and they panic. A lot of times you'll meet families and that's the only source of income is that child's SSI. So if I can use this sheet and show them how much more money they're going to have at the end of the month, a lot of times they're convinced to let them go to work. And I always do, I do a calculation based on part-time, and then I do a calculation based on full-time. I also do a calculation where the person might be making $2,000 a month and not getting any SSI, but still keeping their Medicaid, and we'll talk more about that work incentive.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a couple of comments, and maybe Stacey can help us with this one. And it's from Michael, who says, I have an 82-year-old consumer who receives SSI and is going to be employed soon. What can she expect from Social Security? I think I'm reading that right, 82-year-old, and she will be earning between $400 and $500 a month.
I just have one clarifying question before Stacey answers. Does she also receive any retirement, either from herself or maybe as a widow?
Okay, so Michael, if you can send us that comment, that would be great. And while we're waiting for that from Michael, Brenda sent us a comment that if a child is receiving SSI, this has to do with the previous eligibility questions, prior to 18, if receiving SSI prior to 18 and there is no break in eligibility, they don't have to reapply at 18. A medical review is done using adult criteria instead of child disability rules to determine if they are disabled. So you want me to reread that, or does that make sense?
No, I mean, yeah. When the child turns 18, they have to be found disabled through a medical CDR to be found eligible as an adult. But there is an application process. But yes, the benefits do not have to be interrupted. It can be smooth.
Can continue. Okay.
Yes, as long as it's done timely.
All right. And Michael did send in a couple of answers. I think to your question about other benefits is no. The other comment he has is, does the consumer still report her monthly earnings?
Stace, did you want that?
Well, we only work with people age 14 to 65. Once they're retirement age, we're required to send them to the Social Security office. So
yeah, but for SSI purposes, there is no difference. This is their calculation sheet. So, because again, it's a needs-based program. This isn't just for people with disabilities. So you would still want to look at this. Okay.
All right, that's it.
Okie dokie. All right. Well, we are going to go on and start learning about some of these work incentives so that we know where to plug them in on our calculation sheet. Now, I remember I was working under contract with VCU when I learned about this program, and I really thought it was a typo because I could not believe how amazing this is. As Stacey alluded to, oftentimes SSI, it's really the only check that the family gets, and it's kind of a generational thing. Grandma got it, mom got it, I get it, my kids will get it, and it's almost an expected entitlement, and I use the term entitlement tongue-in-cheek there because we know it's not an entitlement. But it's kind of a generational thing that everybody's on SSI, and it's just assumed that you will be. So Social Security is aware of this, and they're really trying to find ways of breaking that and really encouraging people before they get so used to the check to really want to go to work. And so one of the most amazing work incentives that they have out there is called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. And to get this, you have to be regularly attending school, and you have to currently be under the age of 22. They're really trying to lift that law because there's so many older students going back to college, but for right now, it is what it is, attending school under the age of 22, and you go to work. What Social Security says is we are not, in 2014, going to count $1,750 of your gross earnings each month. And you're like, that's amazing. Or I hope you're saying that's amazing because it's pretty amazing. But here is where Social Security is so wise. They know that the more education a student gets, the higher salary that they're going to be able to earn, and the less likely they are to remain or return to the role. So Social Security does not want a student to just become a full-time employee and, kind of become lackadaisical about being a student. So they put a calendar year cap on it. They say, yes, indeed, we will exclude $1,750 of your monthly earnings, but we're going to cap it on a calendar year, January through December, at $7,060. So what does that mean? Well, that means one of the things that CWICs, or people who work with beneficiaries who qualify for this work incentive, do is they help them figure out how to work weekends, work vacations, work the summer, how to use this benefit so that they are still full-time students, but they're getting that work experience. So they kind of get that hunger for wanting employment after they graduate. But we're helping them. We really focus more on the calendar year cap than we do the monthly exclusion, because we want to figure out how to take that $7,060 and maximize it over a calendar year. Now, this is not automatic, or not always automatic, so Stacey has a little form she wants to kind of talk to you about. Stace?
Yes, I found, the student earned income exclusion should be automatic, but I found that a lot of SSI representatives in our area didn't know about it. And I met with a lot of students whose checks were being reduced incorrectly. So what we did is we created a form that it's a request for student earned income exclusion, and it's just a simple form that we fax to Social Security each time a student goes to work. And it'll just say John Doe is employed at, he's under age 22, his date of birth, what school he's attending, and then we also give the name of a teacher or a counselor that can provide that information and a phone number so that they can contact them to verify if they need to. We give them a graduation date, and we also stress that they'll be eligible for this exclusion up until their 22nd birthday, which will be on their 22nd birthday. But we always send that request now because we found that this is one of the work incentives that gets overlooked the most. So each time we have a student, we do this request for student earned income exclusion, and I have a good example letter that I can provide to you if you would like that.
Okay. And I bet they're telling Noreen right now that they want a copy of that letter. So let's see in the formula where the student earned income exclusion falls. Please know that you may not change the order of this calculation sheet because you're just not going to get it by Social Security. So we're going to do the same dance. This person receives $200 of Title II. We subtract the $20, so they count $180 of it. And we're going to pretend that this person does get a job and they earn $1,750. We're going to do simple math because we're in public. Well, we're going to deduct $1,750, so there's nothing to count. There's nothing to minus 65. There's nothing to divide by 2 of that $1,750. Social Security's counting none of it. So in step 3, we're going to take the $180 and bring it over. There's no countable earned income. So of all of this money, Social Security's only counting $180. So we do the same thing we've done on every other calculation. We're going to assume this person is meeting their fair share. So it's $721 minus the $180. They still receive a check of $514 or $41. In step 5, they have $200 of Title II, $1,750 of earned income, $541 of their revised SSI amount. They are receiving monthly usable income of $2,491. And you see I put danger. And the reason that's a danger is you're over resources. So when you work with a student who absolutely wants to earn a lot of money, you have got to keep an eye on their resources because it's income the month they get it, and it's a resource every month thereafter. You have got to get them to spend. Now, I hear you chuckling if you're really thinking this through, because what teenager really keeps money in their pocket? But you still have to watch it. The other thing that I have to say is we're not done with our calculation yet, because we have to look at the calendar year cap for student earned income exclusion of $7,060, and we're going to subtract what we just used. We just used $1,750. So for the calendar year, they only have $5,310 left till the end of December. That's why we don't find it wise for them to burn through it so fast, because once you've used that calendar year cap, you have to wait until the following January, and if you're still eligible, then you'll get a new calendar year cap. Again, that's why we look at vacations, weekends, summers. And let me just point out, because sometimes people get confused on this, if that amount of earned income was $500, we would only reduce it by $500. We don't automatically take $1,750. It's up to $1,750. So then in the calculation down here, we would put $500 subtracted from the calendar year cap. So Stace, did you kind of want to talk about what happens when a student goes to work for the first time, and we're going to take a peek into that Title II world?
Yes. When we sit down with parents and students, we always try to have the parents there or the guardian to help them understand that as this student is working, they're going to earn credits towards Social Security. And where someone my age, it might take them 5 years to qualify for Social Security benefits, a student can actually qualify after only, I believe, 6 credits. So, and you get 4 credits a year. So in a year and a half, this student could qualify for Title II or SSDI. And I encourage this because really Title II and SSDI is the benefit you want to be on. Because if I'm on SSDI, I don't have to worry about going over resources. I don't have to worry if my grandmother leaves me an inheritance. I can still keep that benefit if I get married. So I actually encourage people to try and qualify for Title II.
Good. And I agree. I concur. Noreen, I'm going to go through the next work incentive just because it's familiar, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay.
Okay. This one, hello, you've seen it last week, impairment-related work expense. It is the same exact thing. You go to work, you have disability-related expenses that you pay for out of your pocket that nobody reimburses you for. The only difference is in the math calculation, because last week I said they take it right off the top of gross earnings. Well, not here. And this isn't really your best work incentive for SSI, because if you look, IRWI falls on the calculation sheet before the divide by 2. So whatever IRWI expense you have, you're only really credited 50%, just simply because where it falls on the calculation sheet. So just quickly looking at this calculation sheet, there's no Title II, there's no form of unearned income in step 1. So they have gross earnings of $750. We get to use the $20 because we didn't use it above, so we subtract 20, we subtract 65, and there's the IRWI. We subtract the IRWI amount of 100, and then they take the remaining balance of 565, divide it by 2. So in this scenario, of the $750, they're only going to count $282.50. And again, we're going to take that amount and subtract it from the $721 in step 4. And so this person would still get an SSI check of $438.50, and again, still has Medicaid. But in step 5, there's a twist to it. We still take the $750 of earnings. We still take the revised amount of SSI. We add them together. But we have to remember that we told Social Security we have out-of-pocket expenses of $100. So from that total that we've been using, we have to subtract the $100 IRWI. So our usable income is still great. It's still $1,088.50 plus Medicaid. So it still benefits you to go to work, but it's not quite as appealing as an IRWI for Title II, because with Title II you get all of it. Here, because it falls on the calculation sheet before the divide by 2, you're only getting credit for 50%. Noreen, now I'll take a question, or we'll take questions if there are any.
I don't see any questions yet, but I'm sure they'll come in now.
Okie dokie. Well, let's talk about blind work expenses. Remember I talked about those advocates who just had their act together when they were creating all this stuff? Well, blind work expense, and you didn't hear me talk about it last week, so don't be writing me hate mail that you can't get it for your Title II beneficiary, because there isn't a blind work expense for people on Title II. This is SSI. For SSI, there's a work incentive called blind work expense. It's very similar to the IRWI in that it helps you go to work and you pay for it out of your pocket and nobody reimburses you. Where it differs is that it does not, I repeat, does not have to be related to your disability, okay? And so what do I mean by that? FICA taxes would be a deduction. It's automatically taken out of your check. Lunches, I'm trying to look at the more extremes. Dog food, vet bill, transportation fees. I mean, it can be related to your disability, but it doesn't have to be just related to your disability. All of those out-of-pocket expenses can be deducted as a blind work expense. And again, like I explained last week for an IRWI, I'm not going to give you an all-inclusive list because there isn't one. With the IRWI and the blind work expense, as I said last week, you have to be able to look at Social Security with a straight face and show how it is related to them going to work in this case, why they need it to work. The other thing, when you look at the calculation sheet, the blind work expense comes after the divide by 2, so they get full 100% credit of their out-of-pocket expenses. Again, going through the calculation sheet so you're used to it. There is no unearned income in step 1, so we just leave that there. Under step 2, their earned income is $600 gross a month. We get to minus the 20, we didn't use it above. We get to minus 65, then we divide by 2 the remainder, and then we get to deduct the blind work expense. So the remainder after dividing by 2 was $257.50. We subtract $240 in blind work expense. So of the $600 in gross wages, Social Security is only going to count $17.50. So they don't, by the way, I probably should say this because somebody will send Noreen a question. There is no higher rate. Remember, there was a higher SGA rate for people who are blind. There's not a different rate for SSI, again, because it's needs-based. So this person still is eligible, paying their fair share. They're getting $721, but their check is only reduced by $17.50, even though they went to work and are grossing $600. We do the same thing. We add the earned income of $600, the revised SSI check of $703.50 to come up with a total of $1,303.50. But like with the IRWI, we've told Social Security we have out-of-pocket expenses, so we must pay for those blind work expenses. But we still have countable income of over $1,000. So again, the blind work expense is a good work incentive because it comes after the divide by 2, so it really is a dollar for dollar reduction. So Noreen, are there any questions?
The question here is in regards to a person whose primary diagnosis is not blindness, but would they still be eligible for the blind work incentive?
You have to, and I probably should add this to the slide, it has to be statutory blindness, and there's a definition of that. And I would have to pull that up. I don't keep that on the forefront of my brain. But if they have statutory blindness as a disability, they would be eligible for this. Now, Stace, you and I weren't thinking about this when we were doing this, but we should probably say, oftentimes we might work with somebody who has diabetes or something as a work incentive or as a disability. And if they progress to statutory blindness, you really want to get that on the chart so that they can be eligible, Title II or SSI, for these, you know, greater incentives to have that disability. So kind of keep your eye on that. If somebody qualifies for statutory blindness, that they progress into it maybe from diabetes, you need to notify Social Security. And again, notification would be proof from the eye doctor that this person does indeed meet the requirements of statutory blindness. And if you want that definition of statutory blindness, we can get that for you. Just let Noreen know. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, we are wrapping up. We have about 15 minutes of talk time before we're going to end with some questions. So we just love this work incentive. I mean, it is just the most amazing work incentive, and it could be a 2-week training. It literally could. Because so far, last week and this week, I've talked to you about, and Stacey's talked to you about, what work incentives are available when somebody goes to work. Okay? This one really says, what do you want to do? What's your career? What's your employment goal? How can I help you attain that? And there is a form. It's a pass form that you fill out, and it's pretty long. I think it's like 16, 17 pages. It's out there, so it intimidates a lot of people. But what this simply says is, what's your vocational goal? And the rest of the whole application process for PASS is how you're going to attain it. How are you going to reach that goal? So there are some requirements, though. Remember, this is an SSI work incentive. I did not talk to you about it last week. So the key to PASS is you have to be SSI eligible to have a PASS, but you may not set aside your SSI in a PASS. Because remember, SSI, it's needs-based. It is for food and shelter only. But let's say you do receive Title II, or you're working, or both. You have other income. We demonstrate to Social Security how you set aside the other income, not your SSI, into a PASS plan, and we help you receive your work goal. And Stacey has a story about, Stacey and I have written some really fun passes. So Stacey's just going to share a pass or two. I'm not sure what she's going to share on some that she's done in the past. And then I'll show you where the calculation of it falls.
Yes. We wrote a pass for a lady who was going to get her master's degree. And we wrote the pass for her, submitted it. She got through school. And now she has been hired as a full-time caseworker, and she makes over $2,000 a month. So if she's making over $2,000 a month, obviously she doesn't get an SSI check anymore, but she kept her Medicaid under a work incentive called 1619B that we're going to talk about in just a minute. Another thing is a lot of people come to me. Someone just came to me last month, and he said, I want to write a pass for a car because I need to get to the doctor. Well, you can't write a pass for a car because you need to get to the doctor. It has to be a work goal. If he had come to me and said, I want to be a nurse, and I have my nursing degree, but I don't have transportation and I live out in a rural area, then we could have written probably the pass for the car because it was going to lead to employment. But you can't just write a pass for a car. There always has to be a vocational goal. The goal has to be viable. I've had a person who had a back injury, and he wanted to write a pass to become a nurse, and the pass was not approved because if you have a back injury, you're probably not going to be successful as a nurse. Another thing, you can write a pass for self-employment, and we do these often, but just know that the pass for self-employment must include a business plan. And it's also been my experience that the pass is more likely to be approved if the person has DARS and the Small Business Administration assisting them.
You good?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, and that is so true because Social Security knows Social Security. They don't know rehab. And so if you can connect with vocational rehab in your state to bless the pass when you submit it, it's really good. Now, I'm going to show you the calculation and give you a few more things because there's usually so many questions on PASS. So what I'm going to say about PASS, because we only have about 10 minutes, is if you have PASS questions or if you think you have a PASS candidate, get a hold of us. We'll happily help you. And we'll tell you the pitfalls if you can't have one, or I mean we'll give you a little bit more in-depth as you think you might have a pass available. But everybody always asks me going, well, how much pass can I set aside? So let's look at this. Again, it's the same dance we've been doing. The person has Title II of 220. We disregard the first 20, so they count only 200. Gross wages of 429 minus 65 because we've used the 20. Divide by 2, so we have countable unearned income in step 3. We have countable earned income in step 3. We add them together for $416.50. There's your word pass. That is how much money you can set aside in your pass. And I and Stacy were pretty guilty of usually putting all of it aside, only because we can demonstrate that they can still pay their other bills. And we know that if we set aside all of the money, they will have more money to set aside to hopefully complete the pass quicker and to get everything that they need to become that nurse: college, equipment, supplies, uniforms, whatever. So in this calculation, it's the same thing we've been doing, $721 in step 4. There's no countable income. So this person is still receiving $721. Step 5 is exactly the same too. We have a $220 unearned income check. We have a $498 gross earned income check. We have $721 in SSI. But we have to remember we must deduct that pass set aside. That pass set aside must be in that pass account every month, or you must have receipts. You've got to total what you told Social Security you would set aside. But you still have usable income even with setting aside that money in the pass of over $1,000. There are 10,000 other things we can tell you about pass, but we are running out of time. I do just want to allude to, remember when we talked about the student earned income exclusion being over resources. You can use those resources to set aside in a pass plan if you have a student. But also, because oftentimes the student earned income exclusion takes you to zero countable income right away, sometimes the pass just simply isn't viable during a student earned income exclusion because it's taken first on the calculation sheet. With that, I will take a brief couple of questions so that we can end on time. We got about 10 minutes.
So the first question I have is what can past set-aside funds be spent on? Do you have to report this to Social Security?
Oh, absolutely, and it's part of the past packet. It's kind of like Stacy alluded to being a nurse. So in the things I need to purchase, I'm going to need to purchase my college, my books, any fees, maybe transportation expenses, maybe I need a computer. During practicum, I'm going to have uniforms and my stethoscope and other nursing equipment. There's a test that you have to pass to become a nurse, so I'm going to have to pay for that test. And the pass isn't successful and over when I graduate as a nurse. The pass is over and successful when I am a nurse. So it's also maybe even putting in a headhunter to help you find a nursing position. So any other questions, Noreen?
Okay, so can it pay for employment supports?
Yes, you can have a job coach. You know, maybe the person is a part-time janitor and just needs a full-time janitor, and part of that is they need a job coach to come in and help them learn to use the two different kinds of buffers, the propane and the electric. So you can pay for job coaching. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next question is on any time limitations related to any of the work incentives.
Okay, for the student earned income exclusion, it's age requirement. You age out of student earned income exclusion. For IRWI and blind work expense, there is no age requirement. You just have to have the approved expenses. For a pass is time limited based on what your goal is. For someone to go from a part-time to full-time janitor, they're probably going to look at probably a 12-month maximum, maybe 18-month pass plan, because it's not reasonable to take 5 years to go from part-time to full-time. But if you're needing a college degree or some level of sophisticated training, if you're getting a college degree, you can have a pass plan up to 5 or 6 years, especially if the person isn't able to carry a full caseload for whatever reason. So it really is individualized based on what the plan is and the person whose plan it is, and Social Security will deem it reasonable, a reasonable time.
Okay. So then the next question is related to that. If I work through one pass plan, can I write another?
Oh boy, yes, you can have as many passes as you can get approved, but you can only have the one vocational goal in a lifetime. For instance, if I write a pass plan to become a nurse and I stop it for whatever reason and I don't do it successfully, I may never again write another pass to be a nurse, but I can write a pass to be a doctor. I mean, I can write a pass to be a car mechanic. I can write a pass to be a beautician. You can get them as many as you can get approved, and I say that because we have some folks out there that have quite a reputation for submitting lots of passes and seeing none of them through.
So, and the next question might actually be a good segue for you. If you drive your SSI check to zero through earned income, how long will it take to be eligible? How long will you be eligible for Medicaid benefits?
Love you. What a good segue. Whoever that was, hats off to you. Was that you, Stacy?
No.
So,
It was Michael. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael, because that is a segue, and this is something that I also need you guys to hear very, very clear. We haven't spoke about Medicaid yet, except that if you live in the state of Texas, it's automatic once you're found eligible. The law, remember I said 1619A and the SGA stuff? Well, 1619B is a great secret, and let me tell you, Stacy will tell you she has to fight for it. 1619B simply says, because of work, not because of all that 12-month suspension period and stuff, but because of work, I earn so much money that even using all of these work incentive, my SSI check goes to zero. Social Security will allow me to keep my Medicaid for free because my earnings are too high. Not because I won something at the lotto or I have inheritance, but because I went to work, and it's a thank you almost. And I get to keep my Medicaid for free until I reach my state's threshold. And the state threshold is a calculation that each state does for an average Medicaid spender. And in 2014, in the state of Texas, and I apologize, if I didn't already, I can get a link to Noreen on the other states. But in 2014, that is countable earnings of $33,407. Because that's what the state of Texas says you need to earn to replace your Medicaid. Stace, if you would like to quickly, because we're running out of time, tell a little bit about what your journey has been with 1619B on helping people, and then maybe go into some individualized threshold.
Okay. 1619B is the greatest work incentive because you can have someone who's on SSI, like our lady who went and got her master's degree. She makes over $2,000 a month. She's below the state threshold of $33,407 per year, so she's going to get to keep her Medicaid as long as she stays below that amount. One of the things we had to be really careful with her, though, is that she has been living on, in the past, SSI for all these years. So that's, her bills are not, they don't add up to a whole lot of money. So she's got to be very careful to remain under the resource limit. So I talk to her often about, make sure that your bank account is below the $2,000 resource limit, because if you go over, you could jeopardize your 1619B status. So we have to watch that very closely. And occasionally she'll buy a computer for work. She just had a lot of dental work done. She's now rented an apartment that's more expensive than what she had before. So you really have to watch the resource limits for people who are on 1619B. 1619B is supposed to be automatic, but a lot of times the local offices miss that. So when we report wages the first time when someone goes over the break-even point, we send a nice note to Social Security and just let them know that this person is eligible for Medicaid under 1619B, and not to forget to let Health and Human Services know that her Medicaid should continue. We also have used the state threshold amount. I work with a lady who, I think she came to me in 2001, I believe, and she's self-employed and she makes between $3,000 and $4,000 a month, which is well over the state threshold amount. But she has 24-hour attendant care, and she has lots of medical expenses, and they exceed $100,000 a year. So we requested through the local office an individual threshold amount for her, and she will never lose her Medicaid unless she makes over what her medical expenses are. So her medical expenses are a little over $100,000 a year. She would have to make more than that amount before her Medicaid would stop, and we request that through the local office.
And just to kind of do some other fine points, when you're on 1619B and you're getting Medicaid only, you're not terminated from SSI. You're kind of in a holding pattern, so if something happens to your job, you automatically go back on SSI. That is for 1619B and the individual threshold. So just keep that in mind, that it's almost impossible to lose your 1619B. I mean, it's especially if you're a high Medicaid user. We have about 2 minutes before we'd like to stop for questions. So just a concurrent beneficiary, we've been talking about it. That's somebody who receives Title II or SSI. And again, when you're looking at somebody, you always look at Title II first, because remember, Title II is all or nothing, and if they're not getting their Title II check, there's nothing to put on Step 1 of SSI. So that's all I'm going to say about it. It's somebody who receives both benefits, and you have to look at where they're at in Title II first, because if they don't get a check, that will impact what the SSI calculation sheet looks like with Step 1. Here's Section 301 again. We've already talked about that. Remember, that's medical recovery, has nothing to do with work, nothing to do with living. That just means that you've recovered and you have a plan in place prior to someone going to work. Again, I'm rushing through this one because we talked about it last week. If you have any questions, because we want to spend the last 5 minutes just answering questions, now's your time. The last 3 slides are just how to get a hold of some experts. And if you're in the state of Texas, I'm going to just end by saying we have WIPA, what Stacey is the lead in as a CWIC. We have 104 counties in West Texas, and there's other WIPA projects around the state. But DARS has a fee-for-service relationship with us. So if you're DARS, or you have a relationship with DARS, refer the beneficiary to DARS, and you can refer them to the WIPA. You can even refer them to Imagine. I mean, if you like what Stacey and I have said, you can ask DARS to go ahead and send us a referral, and you will get this service for free because DARS will pay for it. And it can be just basic information and referral, doing an analysis of their work incentives, talking about any other benefits they might receive, state or federal. So just kind of keep that in mind. And with that, I would like to thank you, Stacey and I, for having a wonderful training. And let's wrap up by seeing what questions we have.
Sure, we have about 5 more minutes to answer some questions here, and we've got a couple already. And one of those is, will the 1619B coverage continue forever as long as the resource limit is honored? For instance, will this trigger any new Social Security medical/vocational tests?
Yes. I mean, you're still eligible for SSI, so you're still going to have your medical CDRs. You still have to report your wages or changes to your employment. I mean, you're still an SSI beneficiary in the eyes of Social Security, so you still have to follow the resource limits. You have to follow the reporting periods. You must follow as if you're still getting a check. But it is not time limited. As long as you're under the threshold and meet all other criteria for SSI, yes, your Medicaid will continue.
Okay. And then hopefully that answered that. Let us know. And then another question is, can you talk a little bit about Ticket to Work in terms of what it means to a provider? And I'm guessing that also means employment network. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Ticket to Work. I can't do it in a minute, but Ticket to Work just simply offers the CDR protection. If you have a plan with an employment network that is active, Social Security will not do a medical CDR. That's that Section 301 where it's medical recovery not due to work. So for somebody who is facing, remember I told you about Sabrina last week who was shot with all the kids, if she was an active ticket participant, they wouldn't have done her medical CDR until she was done working with the employment network. That's all I'm going to say just because of lack of time. If you have any other questions, feel free to send in more specific questions.
Yeah, that might be something that that they can, with your email addresses up there, that y'all might want to have an email conversation.
Yeah, that's why they're up there.
Okay. And one other question that may, as a vendor, as a CRP vendor, can you have a DARS link on your business website or brochures? Which I'm not.
We could say that it's DARS sponsored, but I've never considered it.
Yeah, so I'm not.
If you want to clarify that maybe some more, if you want to talk about if you want the relationship with Imagine maybe acknowledged or something, I'm not sure what you're exactly asking.
It's a little bit unclear, but that's okay. All righty. And are there any other questions then from our audience? Sandy, that looks like we have it. It looks like we covered all the bases today.
All right. Again, don't be shy if some questions come up, you know, especially around 1619B in the past. Those are such important work incentives that you just cannot really give due diligence to in 90 minutes. And Stacey and I will just do our best to respond. If there's something that you want sent out that you think could benefit the group, please let Noreen know, and we will get that information to her and she can get it sent out to you.
Super. Super, Sandy, and thank you so much, and thank you, Stacey, for your time you've given us this morning. For all of you that are out there, I would just want to remind you that you will receive an email with an evaluation form for this session. Please complete that form and email it back to us at untwise@unt.edu. And once you've completed that evaluation and returned it to us, we will email you with your CRC or CEU credit. So again, that email address is untwise@unt.edu. And thank you so much. Y'all all have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.